The first time my father called me a toxic biological investment, I was passing a silver bowl of homemade cranberry sauce across our impossibly long mahogany dining table. My family laughed at me for looking broke after I bet everything on an old, run-down resort. My sister made sure everyone believed I was finished. So I let them laugh. I let them point their perfectly manicured fingers and whisper their cruel, cutting jokes. Until I sold that exact piece of rotting dirt for $168 million. I never said a single word to them about the deal. 3 days later, they were begging to see me. But to understand how a night shift laundry foreperson managed to single-handedly destroy a massive corporate legal empire, you have to go back to that specific Thanksgiving dinner. You need to understand the suffocating, toxic atmosphere of my family's dining room. My father, Gideon, was a corporate bankruptcy lawyer. He was a man who did not build things. He tore them apart. He spent his days dismantling struggling companies, liquidating their assets, and selling the scraps to the highest bidder while pocketing a massive percentage for his own firm. To him, the world was a balance sheet. The family was just another corporation he managed, and his children were either performing assets or liabilities. My mother, Rowena, was a socialite whose entire existence revolved around charity galas, silent auctions, and country club gossip. She was obsessed with climbing the invisible ladder of local high society. She rarely raised her voice. Instead, she weaponized her silence. She used deep, disappointed sighs and subtle eye rolls to manipulate every room she walked into, making you feel like your mere presence was an insult to her refined tastes. And then there was my younger sister, Blythe. Blythe proudly called herself a luxury real estate stager. In reality, she was a professional parasite. She burned through our father's money to fund a lavish lifestyle she could never actually afford, masking her deep incompetence with designer clothes, imported handbags, and a vicious, razor-sharp tongue. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, simply because she knew how to play Gideon's game. I sat across from them at the massive oak table, feeling like a ghost haunting a life I was never truly invited to be part of. The dining room smelled of expensive roasted turkey, fresh sage, and vintage red wine. The crystal glasses clinked softly against the fine china, a delicate sound that felt deafening in the tense, heavy silence of the room. I looked down at my own hands resting in my lap. They were a stark contrast to the elegance surrounding me. My skin was cracked, peeling, and permanently stained a faint yellowish hue from the harsh industrial chemicals I used every single night. I was 32 years old, working 60 hours a week as a foreperson at a massive commercial laundry facility. We serviced the city's elite hotels and hospitals. I spent my life drenched in hot, suffocating steam, breathing in the biting scent of industrial bleach, scrubbing the stains out of thousands of bed sheets slept on by people exactly like my parents. I took a deep breath, the dry air of the heated room burning my lungs. I looked at my father, who was meticulously carving a piece of turkey breast, and I told him the truth. I told him that I had just drained my entire life savings, exactly $60,000, to buy Pine Lake Resort. It was an abandoned, rotting property from the 1950s, sitting on the far edge of town, swallowed by a dark forest, a lake full of thick toxic algae, and decades of neglect. It was my only chance to own something that was mine, to build a future outside of the suffocating heat of the laundry room. The reaction was immediate. There was no shouting. There was no sudden gasp of concern for my financial safety. There was only pure, unadulterated disdain. Gideon did not look up from slicing his meat. He delivered his verdict with the casual, chilling indifference of a judge sentencing a criminal to life in prison. "You are not just a failure, Marin," he said, his voice smooth and steady. "You are a toxic biological investment. You have always been a depreciating asset to this family name. I have watched you squander every opportunity, settling for a life of manual labor like a peasant. And now you have chosen to sink your pathetic life savings into a literal swamp. You are buying garbage because that is the only environment where you feel comfortable. Fitting, I suppose." Rowena delicately dabbed the corner of her mouth with a crisp linen napkin. She let out one of her signature heavy, trembling sighs, as if my very existence had ruined the taste of her expensive meal. She pushed her plate away slightly, refusing to look at me. To my right, Blythe let out a sharp, mocking giggle. She adjusted her wrist, making a grand show of ensuring the dining room chandelier caught the blinding diamonds on her brand-new Cartier watch. Pine Lake, Blythe sneered, her voice dripping with fake, theatrical pity. Marin, sweetheart, that place is a literal biohazard. Are you going to wash their dirty laundry in the toxic sludge? Or are you just trying to match your living situation to your career trajectory? Maybe you can build a little mud hut and charge raccoons for room service. My heart pounded violently against my ribs. The blood roared in my ears, drowning out the soft jazz playing from the hidden speakers in the ceiling. For years, I had accepted my role as the invisible child. I was the designated loser they used to make themselves feel superior. I took the insults. I swallowed the pain. I kept my head down. But sitting there, listening to the quiet, venomous chuckles of my sister and feeling the icy, rejecting glare of my parents, something deep inside my chest finally snapped. The fragile, desperate string tying me to this family, the one that kept me hoping they would one day love me, broke. And it broke cleanly. I did not argue. I did not yell. I did not cry or beg for them to understand my vision. I stood up. My heavy boots scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor, leaving a faint scuff mark. I left my untouched food on the expensive china plate. I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I walked down the long, echoing hallway lined with expensive portraits of their perfect, manufactured lives, and stepped out the heavy front doors into the freezing November night. The snow was falling heavily, biting sharply at my face, but the freezing wind felt incredibly warm compared to the room I had just left. What none of them knew, as they went back to pouring their expensive wine and celebrating their own brilliance, was that beneath the mud, the rot, and the collapsed wood of that derelict resort lay a secret. A secret so massive it was going to strip them of everything they held dear, piece by piece. I drove away from their massive gated community in my rusted pickup truck. The heater was entirely broken, blowing nothing but frigid, icy air against my numb fingers, but I gripped the cracked steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The drive back to my tiny, drafty rented apartment took an hour, and every single mile was haunted by ghosts. To understand why I finally walked away, leaving my dinner untouched and my family behind, you have to walk through the museum of paper cuts I had been trapped in for 3 long decades. My family did not leave physical bruises. They didn't yell or throw things. Their cruelty was elegant. It was 1,000 tiny, daily signals reminding me that I was garbage and Blythe was gold. The first artifact in my mental museum was from when I was 16 years old. I had spent 6 grueling months preparing for the state math championship. While Blythe was out at parties, I was sitting at a tiny desk, studying advanced calculus until my eyes literally bled and my vision blurred. I won first place against hundreds of students. I brought the massive, gleaming trophy home, my chest physically aching with pride. I set it on the center of the living room mantel, hoping my father would finally see me. 2 days later, I came home from school and the mantel was empty. I frantically searched the house. I found my trophy in the garage garbage can, shoved beneath a bag of lawn clippings. Gideon had thrown it away to make room to display Blythe's new cheerleader pom-poms. When I confronted him, sobbing uncontrollably, he barely looked away from reading his financial newspaper. Math trophies do not secure social capital, Marin, he had said, turning the page. Blythe's social connections matter for the future of this family. Do not clutter the main living areas with your little hobbies. It looks desperate. The second artifact was my college graduation. It was an outdoor ceremony, and it was pouring rain. I stood alone in the freezing mud in my cheap, rented graduation gown, scanning the empty bleachers for a familiar face. I waited for 2 hours. They never showed up. I walked 3 miles back to my dorm room, soaked to the bone, clutching a diploma that felt entirely worthless. Later that evening, I checked social media and found out why they were missing. They had skipped my graduation ceremony to attend a lavish launch party for Blythe's new luxury staging startup. It was a startup fully funded by Gideon to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. The company went spectacularly bankrupt exactly 2 months later because Blythe spent all the seed money on expensive furniture for her own apartment. They threw a massive party to celebrate her inevitable failure, but could not spare a single hour for my hard-earned success. But the third artifact was the one that taught me exactly who I was truly dealing with. Last year, I was finally offered an interview for a regional director position at the corporate laundry facility. It meant daytime hours, a massive salary bump, a real office, and an escape from the toxic chemicals. I bought a cheap but professional suit. I prepared for weeks. On the morning of the interview, I walked out to my car and found 2 police cruisers blocking my driveway with their lights flashing. Blythe had anonymously called the police and reported my car as stolen, providing my exact license plate. The officers drew their weapons, ordered me to the ground in the wet dirt, and handcuffed me in front of all my neighbors. I spent 4 agonizing hours in a holding cell while they slowly cleared the paperwork and realized it was a false report. I missed the interview. The position went to someone else. When I confronted my parents, knowing full well it was Blythe's twisted idea of a prank, Rowena sighed her heavy sigh. Blythe was just worried about the crime rate in your bad neighborhood, Marin, my mother said, sipping her tea. She thought someone took your car. You should be thanking her for being so vigilant. Stop being so dramatic and playing the victim all the time. It is exhausting for us. Blythe knew exactly what she was doing. She knew about the interview. She orchestrated my ruin just for the thrill of watching me lose, just to ensure I stayed at the bottom so she could stay at the top. I pulled my truck off the paved main road and onto the overgrown, heavily rutted dirt path leading to Pine Lake Resort. The headlights cut through the heavy, falling snow, illuminating the nightmare I had just spent $60,000 on. It was horrifying. The main lodge sagged violently in the middle, its roof partially caved in under the weight of decades of snow and rot. The windows were entirely shattered, staring out into the darkness like dead, empty eyes. Beyond the lodge, the massive lake was a solid sheet of dark, frozen sludge. The smell of decay, wet mildew, and rotting pine wood hung heavy and thick in the freezing air. It looked like a graveyard for forgotten things. I parked the truck and stepped out, the snow crunching loudly under my worn, thin boots. I had absolutely no money left. My bank account was empty. I had a monthly mortgage payment that was going to drain every single cent of my 4-person salary, leaving me with pennies for food. The logical part of my brain screamed that Gideon was right. It screamed that I had thrown my life into a toxic swamp, that I was a fool who deserved to be poor. I wrapped my thin canvas jacket tighter around my shivering shoulders, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. I was terrified. The isolation was immense. But beneath that terror, buried deep in my chest, was a fierce, blazing fire of defiance. This rotting garbage pile was mine. It belonged to me. Nobody could throw away my achievements here. Nobody could call the police on me for existing. Nobody could tell me I did not belong. I stared at the dark, frozen lake, the wind whipping my hair across my face, and I promised myself I would survive this winter, even if the cold tried to kill me. The reality of living at Pine Lake Resort was a brutal, relentless physical trauma. I managed to patch the roof of a small, windowless supply closet attached to the rear of the main lodge, turning it into my bedroom. It smelled constantly of industrial bleach and damp, rotting wood, but it blocked the howling wind. I slept in a sub-zero camping bag on a bare mattress I found abandoned in the basement. My life became a punishing cycle of pure exhaustion. I worked my 12-hour shifts at the laundry facility from 6 in the evening until 6 in the morning, drowning in the suffocating heat of industrial dryers and the biting, eye-watering scent of chlorine. Then, I would drive to the resort, change into freezing, stiff construction clothes, and spend the precious daylight hours hauling rotted timber, ripping out moldy drywall with my bare hands, and fighting the unforgiving winter elements. My hands bled constantly. My muscles ached so deeply into the bone that I had to literally roll off my mattress onto the floor every afternoon because my spine flat out refused to bend. I lived exclusively on cold canned soup and stale bread because I could not afford a camping stove. And then, just as the winter hit its absolute coldest point, Blythe decided I was not suffering enough. One freezing Tuesday morning, a white county vehicle with official seals on the doors rolled down my muddy, pothole-riddled driveway. A man with a thick gray mustache, a heavy winter coat, a clipboard, and a permanent, deep scowl stepped out of the truck. His metal name tag read Orson, County Structural Inspector. I got an anonymous tip, Orson grunted, refusing to look me in the eye as he tapped a pen against his clipboard. Someone reported illegal hazardous dumping and unsafe structural occupancy at this address. Said you were running an illegal biohazard dump site. I am here to issue an eviction notice and heavy fines. Blythe. It had to be Blythe. She could not just let me fail in peace. She had to actively, legally destroy my only refuge. I stood there in the freezing mud, wearing 3 layers of ragged, hole-filled sweaters, holding a rusted crowbar. I felt the hot tears welling up in my eyes, burning against the cold air, but I swallowed them down forcefully. I was so incredibly tired. I did not argue. I explained in a quiet, broken voice to Orson that I was just clearing out the old debris, that I was desperately trying to save the property from total collapse. I invited him inside to inspect the patched closet I was living in to prove I wasn't hoarding biohazards. Orson walked silently through the wreckage of the lodge. He looked at my makeshift, freezing bedroom. He looked at the meager stack of dented canned food in the corner. He looked at my bleeding, blistered hands wrapped in dirty bandages. The deep scowl on his face slowly softened into something resembling genuine anger, but the anger was not directed at me. The anonymous tip came from a very fancy zip code across the city, Orson muttered, looking at the ceiling. Sounds to me like someone with way too much money and free time has a serious vendetta against you, kid. He didn't write the citation. He didn't evict me. Instead, Orson walked out to his county truck, grabbed a heavy-duty industrial tarp, a massive staple gun, and 2 thermoses of hot coffee. He spent the next 2 hours helping me seal a massive leak over the main hallway that I couldn't reach on my own. I am retiring next month, he grumbled as he slammed staples into the wood. I hate bullies. People who kick you when you are already in the mud are the lowest form of life. Do not let the bastards win. Orson became my unexpected, grumpy guardian angel. He would stop by on his lunch breaks, pointing out dangerous load-bearing walls I shouldn't touch and showing me how to mix concrete properly so the foundation wouldn't crack. He wasn't the only one. Down at the local hardware store, a teenage cashier named Tamsin realized what I was doing. She saw me counting literal pennies from a jar just to buy small boxes of nails. Without saying a single word to me about it, she started ringing up my industrial-grade supplies under the store's damaged goods discount code. $100 worth of heavy screws, sealant, and lumber suddenly cost me $10. These strangers, people who owed me absolutely nothing, treated me with more dignity, respect, and quiet grace than my own flesh and blood ever had in my entire life. But the elements do not care about human kindness. A month later, a massive, late-season winter storm hit the valley. I was inside the main lodge, trying to brace a sagging floorboard in the dark when the wind howled like a wounded animal. The entire structure groaned under the pressure. Before I could step back, the rotted wood beneath my heavy boots splintered with a deafening crack. The floor gave way completely. I fell hard, tumbling into the pitch-black darkness of the forgotten basement. I hit the cold earth floor, sharp pain shooting up my right leg, the dust and mold choking my lungs. I lay there in the dark, shivering violently, wondering if this was the end of the line. But as the dust slowly settled, the beam of my dropped flashlight caught something metallic hidden behind a collapsed, crumbling brick wall. I didn't open the heavy metal box that night. My leg was badly bruised, throbbing with a dull ache, and the freezing temperature forced me to crawl painfully out of the basement and huddle deep in my sleeping bag just to survive the night. I pushed the discovery to the back of my mind because the very next day was a major event in my family's social calendar, Rowena's 60th birthday party. The heavy, gold-embossed invitation had been mailed to the laundry facility, a subtle, sharp reminder that they refused to acknowledge my new address in the woods. The event was held at the most prestigious country club downtown, a place where the membership fees alone cost more than my entire property. A small, foolish part of me, The inner child, still desperately begging for a mother's love and a father's approval, convinced me to go. I thought perhaps the months of silence and distance had softened them. I spent 3 full hours scrubbing the heavy grease, dried mud, and construction dirt from my skin with a pumice stone until I was raw and bleeding. I carefully ironed the only decent dress I still owned, a simple navy blue sheath that was at least 5 years out of style. I arrived at the country club early. I stood in the opulent, marble-floored foyer, listening to a live string quartet play in the background, feeling like an alien invader under the massive crystal chandeliers. Then I heard the sharp, rhythmic clicking of expensive designer heels. Blythe. She walked toward me, wearing a stunning silk gown, holding a massive glass of dark red wine. Her eyes scanned my cheap dress with predatory, mocking delight. "Marin," she purred, her voice loud enough for the nearby wealthy guests to hear. "You actually showed up. I thought you would be too busy rolling around in the mud with the local wildlife." Before I could even form a response, Blythe intentionally hooked her foot on a perfectly flat marble tile. She lunged forward with fake clumsiness, and the entire massive glass of dark red wine splashed directly onto my chest. The deep red stains spread instantly across the navy fabric, ruining the dress completely. "Oh my God, I am so clumsy," Blythe gasped loudly, putting a hand over her mouth, drawing the attention of the arriving guests. Her eyes, however, were cold, hard, and deeply triumphant. "You cannot go into the main ballroom looking like a murder victim, Marin. You better go out to your truck and change into something else. Oh wait, you live in a dumpster. I guess you will just have to wear your work clothes. How sad." I had my heavy canvas laundry facility uniform in the back of my truck. I knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted me to leave. She wanted to erase my presence from the perfect family portrait. But I refused to run away. I walked out to my rusted truck in the cold, took off the ruined, wine-soaked dress, and put on my heavy, faded blue canvas uniform. The bright yellow name tag that read Marin 4% sat heavily on my chest. I took a deep breath, marched back through the front doors, and walked into the grand ballroom. The silence that fell over the massive room when I entered was suffocating. Hundreds of people in flowing silk gowns and custom-tailored tuxedos stopped talking to stare at the woman in the faded blue mechanic suit. Gideon's face turned a dangerous shade of purple with sheer rage. Rowena looked away, putting a hand to her forehead as if she might faint from the embarrassment. But I kept my head high, walked to a back corner near the kitchen doors, and stood there silently. When it was time for the speeches, Blythe took the microphone at the center of the room. She spoke endlessly about family legacy, about elegance, and about our mother's unparalleled grace in society. Then she smiled that venomous, calculating smile I knew too well. "I actually have a special gift tonight," Blythe announced, her voice echoing loudly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "But it is not for Mom. It is for my sister, Marin." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. I stood frozen in my uniform as Blythe walked toward me, holding a beautifully wrapped, massive gift basket. She shoved it roughly into my hands. "Go ahead, open it. The whole room wants to see," she urged, her eyes gleaming with malice. I pulled away the clear cellophane. Inside the basket was a cheap plastic toilet brush, a pair of thick, ugly rubber dishwashing gloves, and a massive, industrial-sized box of rat poison. "Since you decided to bet your entire life on a rotting, rat-infested swamp, I figured the new garbage resort owner needed the right tools for her big startup." Blythe laughed directly into the microphone. The room erupted. People chuckled nervously at first, but as Blythe kept laughing, the laughter grew louder, echoing off the high ceilings. I looked at my parents. Gideon was smirking, taking a slow sip of his expensive scotch, thoroughly enjoying the show. Rowena offered a delicate, practiced laugh, shaking her head as if dealing with a foolish child. They were publicly humiliating me for their own sick entertainment. I stood in the center of the ballroom, holding the box of rat poison. The heat of intense humiliation burned my cheeks, but beneath it, something shifted. The final, lingering trace of daughterly guilt evaporated into thin air. I did not cry. My vision narrowed. The world around me went entirely cold, sharp, and brilliantly clear. I looked at Blythe, memorizing the smug look on her face. Then I looked at my parents. I carefully placed the cruel gift basket on a nearby catering table. I grabbed a large slice of rich chocolate cake from the dessert tray, took a huge bite, chewed it slowly while maintaining dead, unblinking eye contact with my father, and then turned my back on them. I walked out of the ballroom. I didn't rush. I let the heavy, rubber-soled boots of my uniform squeak and echo loudly on the marble floor with every single step. If you think I went home to cry, you are terribly wrong. If you want to know what I found in the dark that changed everything, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, the payback is just getting started. I drove back to Pine Lake Resort in dead, absolute silence. The anger in my blood was no longer a frantic, hot, emotional mess. It had forged into cold, unbreakable iron. I parked the truck, grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, and marched straight into the ruined lodge, ignoring the freezing temperature. I climbed down the collapsed, jagged floorboards into the basement. I went straight to the collapsed brick wall and pulled out the heavy metal box I had found during the storm. It was sealed tight with a thick layer of aged, hardened wax. I smashed the seal with my iron crowbar and popped the rusted lid open. Inside, wrapped meticulously in waterproof oilcloth, was a stack of pristine, hand-drawn documents. They were official geological survey maps dated 1940. I spread them out on the dirt floor, shining my bright light over the intricate lines. I had spent months reading dense county zoning laws and topographic charts just to buy this place, so I knew exactly what I was looking at. The maps did not show a toxic lake or a dead swamp. They showed the complex subterranean structure beneath the property. Right below Pine Lake, plunging deep into the Earth's crust, was a massive, naturally occurring geothermal hot spring. The handwritten notes detailed water temperatures and mineral compositions that were incredibly rare and highly sought after. But the most important document was at the very bottom of the box. It was a legal addendum to the original property deed. Whoever owned this specific parcel of land held the exclusive, unrestricted mineral and subterranean rights to the entire geothermal grid spanning a 10-mile radius. My breath caught painfully in my throat. I traced the faded blue ink with a trembling finger. The lake wasn't toxic because of chemical pollution. It was overgrown with a specific type of thermal algae because the water beneath it was boiling hot and rich in rare, valuable minerals. I wasn't sitting on a swamp. I was sitting on a literal liquid gold mine. I rolled the maps back up, my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I needed to move fast, and I needed to move in total, impenetrable secrecy. The next morning, I called in sick, taking a rare day off from the laundry facility. I drove 3 towns over, far away from my father's extensive legal territory, and found an independent environmental attorney who had a reputation for hating corporate bullies. I showed her the fragile documents. She verified them against county records. She confirmed it. I owned the rights. But to legally secure them, lock out any corporate loopholes, and file the necessary federal patents before the county realized what I had, I needed serious money for the filing fees and preliminary environmental testing. I did something terrifying. I took out massive, high-interest predatory loans using my steady laundry salary as collateral. I maxed out every single credit card I could apply for. I plunged myself into crippling, terrifying debt just to pay the legal fees to lock down the geothermal rights tied in my name. While the complex legal paperwork was processing over the next 2 months, I continued my act. I had to play the part of the broken, pathetic failure my family believed I was. I kept driving the rusted, noisy truck through town. I kept wearing my torn, mud-stained clothes. I kept working my grueling night shifts, letting the dark circles under my eyes deepen and my posture sag. I needed Gideon and Blythe to firmly believe I was bleeding out in the mud, entirely oblivious to the treasure sitting right beneath my boots. Spring finally began to thaw the frozen mud around the resort. The legal patents officially cleared the federal offices. I officially owned the undisputed rights to the largest geothermal energy source in the entire state. And then, just as I anticipated, the sharks caught the scent of blood in the water. I was outside, hammering a loose board on the sagging front porch, when a sleek, black corporate SUV with deeply tinted windows rolled slowly down my driveway. It navigated the deep mud puddles with extreme, careful caution. The doors opened, and 3 men in immaculate, dark-tailored suits stepped out. They looked at the rotting lodge with clear disgust, then looked at me, covered in black grease and sawdust, holding a cheap hammer. The lead man, holding a sleek leather briefcase, stepped forward. He looked entirely out of place in the wilderness. "Marin," he asked, his voice smooth and heavily polished. "My name is Arthur. We represent Aura Wellness Group. We need to have a serious conversation about purchasing your property." I leaned casually on my hammer, looking at the corporate shark standing awkwardly in my mud. A slow, dangerous smile crept onto my face. The trap was set. All I had to do was pull the lever. I did not invite the men in the dark suits inside. I stood on the rotting porch, holding my cheap hammer, and stared them down. Arthur, the polished representative for Aura Wellness Group, tried to hand me a glossy business card. I did not take it. I told him I was busy fixing a floorboard and that he was trespassing on private property. I watched his expensive leather shoes sink into the thick, freezing mud. He looked at me like I was a feral animal, but beneath his disgust, I saw a flicker of genuine panic. He told me they would be in touch. He got back into his luxury SUV, and they drove away. I knew they would return, but I needed to know exactly how much leverage I held before they did. The universe, it seemed, was more than happy to provide me with the exact information I needed, delivered by the very people who despised me the most. The next afternoon, the roaring engine of a bright red sports car shattered the quiet peace of the forest. The car bounced violently over the deep ruts in my driveway, the low undercarriage scraping against the rocks. The driver slammed on the brakes, sending a wave of dirty water splashing across the dead grass. The doors opened, and out stepped my Aunt Veda and my sister, Blythe. Aunt Veda was Gideon's older sister. She was a minor local politician, a woman whose entire career was built on kissing the right rings and spreading malicious gossip masquerading as civic concern. She wore a pristine white wool coat that cost more than my first car. Blythe was beside her, holding a ridiculously oversized designer handbag, her face twisted in a permanent sneer. They were the perfect flying monkeys, sent by Gideon and Rowena to gather fresh intelligence on my misery. They stood safely on a patch of dry gravel, looking up at the sagging lodge and then at me. I was wearing my stained laundry uniform, my hands black with engine grease from trying to fix the generator. "Marin, darling," Veda called out, her voice loud and incredibly fake. "We were just driving through the area and thought we would check on you." "Oh my goodness. Look at this disaster. Are you actually sleeping in this biohazard?" "I am," I said, my voice entirely flat. I did not drop my wrench. I just stared at them. Blythe pulled out her phone and immediately started taking pictures. She snapped a photo of the collapsed roof. She snapped a photo of the toxic-looking lake. Then she pointed the camera directly at me, making sure to capture the grease on my face and the holes in my boots. "Mom is just heartbroken, Marin," Veda said, putting a hand to her chest, though her eyes danced with cruel excitement. "She cries to her friends about it. Living like a homeless person just to prove some kind of rebellious point. It is genuinely tragic. I am going to have to ask the town council to intervene for your own safety." I watched Blythe type furiously on her screen. I knew exactly what was happening. Within 10 minutes, those photos would be posted on her social media, and Veda would share them to her political page with a passive-aggressive caption about mental health and praying for troubled family members. It was a masterclass in weaponized concern. A year ago, I would have panicked. I would have tried to hide my face, tried to justify my vision, begged them not to post the pictures. Now, I felt nothing but profound, freezing calm. "If you are done taking photos for your little fan club, Veda, you should probably leave," I said softly. "The mud up here has a habit of ruining expensive tires." Veda gasped, clutching her designer scarf in mock offense. "Well, I can see the isolation has done wonders for your manners. We're only trying to help you before the town takes this garbage dump away from you anyway." I froze. I kept my face blank, but my mind snapped to attention. What do you mean, takes it away? Veda smirked, realizing she had a piece of information I didn't. She puffed out her chest, loving the feeling of superiority. Oh, you don't know? The town council has been in talks with a massive eco-resort group. They are looking to revitalize this entire sector. If you don't clean this mess up, they are going to use eminent domain to seize the property for the public good. You are going to lose everything, Marin. You better pack your bags. Blythe giggled, slipping her phone back into her purse. Good luck in the swamp, sis. Try not to get eaten by a bear. They hurried back into the sports car, locking the doors with a loud click, and sped off, tires spinning angrily in the dirt. I watched them go, a small, genuine smile creeping onto my face. Let them take their pictures. Let them laugh. Veda was a fool. She thought she was terrifying me with the threat of the town council, but she had just handed me the missing piece of the puzzle. The eco-resort group she mentioned had to be Aura Wellness. And if they were lobbying the town council for eminent domain, it meant they were desperate. They needed my land, and they needed it immediately. My burner phone, a cheap plastic device I bought to separate my legal dealings from my family, began to ring. It was an unknown number. The sharks were circling back. I wiped the grease off my hands with a dirty rag and answered the burner phone. Marin, this is Arthur from Aura Wellness Group, the smooth voice echoed through the cheap speaker. I apologize for dropping by unannounced yesterday. We prefer face-to-face introductions, but I understand you were busy. I am calling to make a formal offer on Pine Lake Resort. I am listening, I said, leaning against the rotting wooden railing of the porch. My firm represents a major ecotourism corporation, Arthur continued, his tone practiced and soothing. We are acquiring land in the valley for a state-of-the-art wellness retreat. Your property sits within our proposed development grid. We are prepared to offer you a very generous buyout for your 61 acres and the ruined structures upon it. We can authorize an immediate cash offer of $20 million. We can close in 14 days. $20 million. For a woman who had spent the last winter eating cold beans and shivering under dirty blankets, that number was a physical shock to the system. The forest around me seemed to spin. 20 million was enough to quit the laundry facility, buy a mansion, and never worry about a single bill for the rest of my natural life. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to say yes, to cry tears of joy, and to sign whatever contract he put in front of me. But then I remembered the lesson I had learned from watching Gideon's ruthless bankruptcy deals. When a corporate shark offers you a massive fortune right out of the gate, without negotiating, it means they are terrified you will discover what you actually hold. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I channeled every ounce of the cold, dismissive energy my parents had ever shown me. Arthur, I said, my tone flat and entirely unimpressed. Let us not insult each other's intelligence. I know exactly what is sitting underneath my property. I hold the exclusive, unrestricted subterranean rights to the largest geothermal hot spring in the state. Your client cannot build a luxury thermal wellness retreat without my water. $20 million is an insult. Do not call me again until you are ready to have a serious conversation. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped the device into the mud. I had just rejected $20 million. I stared at the blank screen, terrified I had just made the most catastrophic mistake of my entire life. But the fear did not last. I went inside my freezing room, opened my cracked laptop, and tethered it to my phone's meager data connection. I spent the next 10 hours digging through public corporate filings, federal land registries, and financial disclosure dockets. I was looking for the structural backbone of Aura Wellness Group. I needed to know who was funding them, who was backing the loans for such a massive development. At 3 a.m, my eyes burning from the bright screen, I found it. It was a heavily redacted guarantor document filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Aura Wellness was not just building a resort, they were building an empire. They had secured hundreds of millions in construction loans from a consortium of international banks. But because Aura was a relatively new corporate entity, the banks required a massive, ironclad domestic guarantor. They needed a legal firm to underwrite the risk, to put their own assets on the line as collateral. I scrolled down to the signature page of the guarantor agreement. The name printed in bold black ink made my heart stop entirely. It was Gideon's law firm. My father had leveraged his entire corporate legal empire, everything he had built over 40 years, to personally guarantee the Aura Wellness Project. He stood to make an astronomical percentage if the project succeeded. But if Aura failed to secure the core land, my land, the banks would pull the funding. The project would collapse. The margin calls would hit, and Gideon's firm would be forced to cover the hundreds of millions in defaulted loans. He had broken federal financial regulations by over-leveraging his firm's assets. If this deal fell through, Gideon would not just go bankrupt. He would be disbarred. He would likely go to federal prison. The ironic link was so perfect, so incredibly poetic, it felt like it had been scripted by the universe itself. My father, the man who called me a toxic investment, had unwittingly tied his entire survival to the swamp he mocked me for buying. My success was directly tied to his absolute ruin. The power I suddenly held over the man who had terrorized me my entire life was intoxicating. I closed the laptop. The sun was beginning to rise over the frozen lake. I did not feel cold anymore. I felt like a god. The next 3 weeks were a grueling, psychological war of attrition. I hired an anonymous proxy lawyer, a ruthless negotiator from a firm 3 states away, to handle all communications with Aura Wellness. I instructed him to squeeze them until they bled. Arthur did not call back the next day. He did not call back the next week. I spent 14 agonizing days wondering if I had overplayed my hand, if they had found a legal loophole, or if they were simply going to abandon the project. But I held my ground. I continued working my night shifts at the laundry facility. I continued walking around in my torn uniform. I lived exactly as if the phone call had never happened. On day 15, the proxy lawyer updated me. Aura offered $50 million. I told him to reject it. A week later, the number jumped to $80 million. I told him to reject it and demand $100. The pressure behind the scenes must have been catastrophic. I created a fake social media account to silently monitor Gideon and Blythe. Gideon's pristine image was cracking. He looked haggard in the background of Rowena's gala photos. He was losing hair. His suits looked slightly too big for him. The financial blogs were starting to whisper about delays in a major eco-resort deal, and the stress was clearly eating my father alive from the inside out. He knew his firm was standing on the edge of a cliff, but he had no idea that his own daughter was the one pushing him toward the edge. But playing a high-stakes game leaves footprints. One evening, I was walking out to my rusted truck after a brutal 12-hour shift at the laundry plant. The parking lot was empty and dark. A man stepped out from the shadows near the dumpster. He was wearing a rumpled trench coat, holding a digital recorder. "Marin," he said, holding up his hands peacefully. "My name is Cashin. I am an investigative financial journalist for the State Business Chronicle. Please don't run." I froze, my hand hovering over the heavy metal wrench I kept in my pocket. "How do you know my name?" Cashin smiled, a tired, knowing smile. "It took me 3 weeks of digging through shell corporations, blind trusts, and redacted property deeds. But I found the bottom of the rabbit hole. You are the anonymous ghost holding up the Aura Wellness mega project. You are the one squeezing the most powerful corporate law firm in the state into bankruptcy. And I have to admit, seeing you walk out of a commercial laundry facility in a dirty uniform, this is the greatest story of my career." My heart hammered in my chest. If Cashin published the story now, Gideon would find out. He would use his political connections, maybe even hire people to physically intimidate me or force me out of the property before the deal was signed. The element of surprise was my only shield. "What do you want, Cashin?" I asked, my voice deadly serious. "I want the exclusive," he replied, leaning against my truck. "I want the full story. Why a laundry worker bought a ruined resort. Why you were holding out. I want the history." I looked at him, calculating the angles. I needed public validation when this was all over. I needed the world to know exactly what Gideon was. "I will give you everything," I told him, stepping closer. "I will give you the emails, the geological maps, the family history. I will give you a Pulitzer-winning front page. But you do not publish a single word. You do not breathe my name to a single soul until the ink is dry on my final contract. If you leak it early, I will deny everything and sue your publication into the ground." Cashin held out his hand. "Deal. You tell me when to push the button." The vice was tightening. The pieces were all in place. If you are enjoying watching this trap snapshot, please take a quick second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out and lets me know you want to hear the rest of Marin's revenge. By the middle of the third month, Aura Wellness was out of time. Their international banking consortium had issued an ultimatum: secure the land in 7 days, or the funding gets pulled. Arthur flew across the country and demanded an in-person meeting with my proxy lawyer. I insisted the meeting take place not in a fancy boardroom, but exactly where this all started. Arthur and 2 senior executives from Aura Wellness sat uncomfortably on folding chairs around a makeshift table I had built from reclaimed barn wood inside the drafty, ruined main lodge of Pine Lake. I sat across from them, flanked by my proxy lawyer. I deliberately wore my faded blue laundry uniform. I wanted them to know exactly who was taking their money. Arthur opened his sleek leather briefcase. His hands were shaking slightly. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and slid them across the rough wood. $168 million, Arthur said, his voice tight, stripped of all its former corporate smoothness. Full buyout. Unrestricted mineral and water rights. Immediate cash transfer upon signing. This is the absolute ceiling, Marin. The board will not approve a single dollar more. If you decline this, we scrap the location, take the massive financial hit, and the guarantor law firm goes into immediate liquidation. $168 million. The number echoed in the empty, rotting room. I stared at the crisp white paper. I thought about the bitter, freezing winter nights I had survived in the closet just 10 feet away from this table. I thought about the math trophy in the garbage can. I thought about the box of rat poison at the birthday party. I looked at my hands, still scarred and rough from the physical labor. I picked up the heavy gold pen Arthur offered me. But I didn't sign yet. "I accept the financial terms," I said softly, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "But there is one non-negotiable addendum that must be added to this contract before I put my name on it." Arthur looked terrified. "What addendum?" "We have given you everything. Your company is currently represented and guaranteed by my father's law firm," I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the table. "My condition is this: upon the transfer of these funds, Aura Wellness will immediately, permanently, and publicly sever all ties, contracts, and representations with Gideon's firm. You will drop them as your guarantor. You will leave them to face the SEC fallout on their own." Arthur stared at me, his eyes wide. He looked at my proxy lawyer, who merely nodded to confirm the demand was serious. Arthur swallowed hard. He knew dropping the guarantor at this stage would trigger an immediate audit of Gideon's firm, exposing the illegal leveraging. It was a death sentence for my father's career. "Done," Arthur whispered. He signaled to his assistant, who rapidly typed the addendum into the digital file and printed a fresh page from a portable printer. I read the new clause carefully. It was perfectly worded. I brought the gold pen down to the paper and signed my name on the dotted line. 3 hours later, I was sitting in my truck when my phone vibrated. It was a notification from the private wealth management bank I had set up with my proxy lawyer. The deposit had cleared. $168 million. I sat in the cold cabin of the truck. I did not scream. I did not cry. A profound, heavy peace settled over my entire body, starting from my chest and radiating out to my fingertips. The war for my survival was over. I reached into the back seat, picked up the faded, dirty blue laundry uniform jacket I had worn to the country club, walked over to a rusted metal burn barrel, and threw it inside. I struck a match and watched the uniform turn to ash. I pulled out my burner phone and sent a single text message to Cashin the journalist. Push the button. A transaction of that magnitude could not stay hidden, especially not when an investigative journalist was sitting on the story of the decade. At 6 o'clock the following morning, the State Business Chronicle published Cashin's article. The headline took up the entire front page of the website, bold and undeniable: Night shift laundry worker sells ruined resort for $168 million, triggering collapse of state's largest legal empire. The article was a masterpiece. Cashin detailed the brilliant, quiet acquisition of the compound and the strategic holdout for the valley's most valuable geothermal rights. He painted a picture of a mastermind who had operated right under the noses of the corporate elite. But more importantly, he explicitly outlined how the delay in the deal had exposed Gideon's firm for illegal financial leveraging, leading to Aura Wellness dropping them as a guarantor. The article stated that federal regulators were already stepping in to seize Gideon's assets. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic. My burner phone began to melt down with notifications. First, it was the extended family and the public. Cashin had linked the story to my real name. The internet is a ruthless place, and they quickly found Aunt Veda and Blythe. Social media users dug up the photo Veda had posted months ago, the one of me covered in mud, where she mocked me for living like a homeless person. They flooded her political page. Thousands of comments poured in, ridiculing her for mocking the woman who just became the richest person in the county. Veda was forced to delete her social media accounts within 2 hours. Blythe's luxury staging page was bombarded with people calling her a parasite and a clown. The public humiliation they had inflicted on me was returned to them 1,000 times over. At exactly noon, my phone rang with a number I knew by heart. It was my mother, Rowena. I was sitting in the living room of a luxury high-rise penthouse I had rented that morning. I was wearing a thick, cashmere sweater, holding a glass of $1,000 vintage wine. I answered the phone, put it on speaker, and set it on the marble counter. Marin? Oh, Marin, my sweet darling. Rowena's voice was trembling, dripping with a sickeningly sweet, maternal warmth she had not used since I was an infant. Is it true? We just saw the news. Oh, sweetheart, we are just in shock. We are so incredibly proud of you. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like victory. I said absolutely nothing. Your father is right here. He wants to speak with you, she rushed out, the desperate panic bleeding through her polished tone. The line shuffled, and Gideon's voice boomed through the speaker. He did not sound apologetic. He sounded frantic, a wounded animal trying desperately to reassert the control that had just been violently stripped from him. Marin, 168 million? Why didn't you consult me? He demanded, his tone a mix of anger and naked, desperate greed. You are not equipped to handle a windfall like this. You probably left 50 million on the table by not letting my firm negotiate for you. Listen to me. Pack your things. Come back to the house immediately. We need to sit down with my wealth managers and figure out how to structure this to protect the family assets. My firm is facing a slight liquidity issue, and we need to pool our resources. I stopped swirling my wine glass. I leaned over the phone, a cold, dangerous smile spreading across my face. He still thought I was the obedient, terrified child. He still thought he could command me. Gideon, I said, dropping the title of Dad forever. There are no family assets here. This is my money. I earned it by suffering through decades of your contempt. I am not coming home. I am never sitting at your table again. Do not be ridiculous, he barked, his voice cracking with rising hysteria. You owe this family. You owe me. I raised you. I put a roof over your head. My firm is under federal investigation because of you. You have to fix this. You raised a punching bag, I replied coldly, my voice steady as stone. But the punching bag just bought the whole gym. And then I burned it down. Have a nice life in federal court, Gideon. I ended the call. I instantly blocked his number, my mother's number, Blythe's number, and Veda's number. The silence in the penthouse that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I knew people like my father. Narcissists do not accept defeat over the telephone. They demand face-to-face submission. I knew they would come for me, and I was ready for them. 2 days later, I drove back to Pine Lake Resort. But things had changed dramatically. The muddy entrance was now blocked by a massive, automated heavy steel gate, flanked by tall brick pillars. I had hired a premium private security contracting firm the moment the funds cleared. 2 armed guards stood at the entrance. I waited for them on the other side of the gate. I was no longer wearing dirt-stained jeans and an oversized sweater. I was dressed in a custom-tailored, dark charcoal executive suit that cost more than my old rusted truck. My hair was professionally styled. I looked like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Just before noon, Gideon's sleek black Mercedes tore up the dirt road, bouncing wildly over the ruts. The car slammed to a halt just inches from the steel gate. Gideon and Blythe jumped out, marching toward the security guards with furious, unhinged entitlement. "Open this gate immediately," Gideon shouted, his face purple with rage, his tie loose and disheveled. "That is my daughter. I demand to see her. She is stealing family funds." I gave a subtle nod to the lead guard. He pressed a button, allowing the massive steel gates to swing open just enough for me to walk through. I walked slowly down the gravel path to meet them. Blythe stared at me, her mouth hanging slightly open. Her eyes darted over my immaculate suit, my confident posture, the calm, terrifying power radiating from me. The sheer, venomous jealousy visibly contorted her perfect features. I had bypassed her entire life's ambition in a single signature. She was wearing yesterday's makeup, looking frazzled and exhausted. "Marin, this little stunt has gone far enough," Gideon snapped, trying to puff out his chest and project his usual courtroom dominance, though his hands were visibly shaking. "You are making a spectacle of yourself in the press. Fire these guards, let us inside, and we will sort out this financial mess. My firm accounts are frozen. You need to wire $20 million to my holding account by the end of the day or we lose the house." I stopped 10 feet away from him. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. "You didn't come here for your daughter," I said, my voice cutting through the crisp forest air like a scalpel. "You came here for my money. You came here because you cannot stand the fact that the person you deemed a toxic investment just became the most powerful person you will ever meet. Your control ends right here on the outside of this gate." Blythe stepped forward, her voice shrill and desperate. "You think you're better than us now because you got lucky with some dirt? You're still just a dirty laundry worker, Marin. You're nothing. You owe Dad that money." I smiled, a cold, empty expression. I reached inside my suit jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. I tossed it onto the gravel at Gideon's feet. "Those are the public filings from the SEC," I said softly. "The ones showing how you illegally leveraged your firm's pension funds to guarantee the Oro Wellness deal. The deal that failed because I explicitly wrote a clause into my contract demanding they fire you. You didn't just lose the commission, Gideon. You lost your license. You are going to prison." The blood drained entirely from my father's face. He looked as if he had been physically struck in the chest with a sledgehammer. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with horror, his hand reaching blindly behind him until he grabbed the hood of the Mercedes to steady himself. His chest heaved as he realized the trap had been set by the very daughter he threw away. You destroyed your own family," Gideon whispered, his voice stripped of all its usual booming authority. He looked small. He looked pathetic. "No," I corrected him, turning my back on them. "Your arrogance destroyed you. Your cruelty destroyed you. I just survived the winter you left me to die in." I began walking up the path. "Escort them off the property," I called over my shoulder to the guards. "If they return, call the state police and have them arrested for trespassing." I did not look back as the engine revved and the car sped away. The phantom chains that had bound me to their judgment shattered into a million pieces. The dynasty was broken. The money changed my life, obviously. I paid off my predatory loans in a single afternoon. I bought a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city. But the most deeply satisfying checks I wrote were not for myself. I went down to the local hardware store one last time. I handed Tamsin, the teenage cashier who had given me the damaged goods discounts, a thick envelope. Inside was a certified document establishing a fully funded, $200,000 college trust in her name. She cried, hugging me so hard my ribs ached. Then I went to find Orson. The grumpy retired inspector tried to refuse my money, grumbling loudly about not needing charity. So, instead of cash, I bought him a brand new, top-of-the-line heavy-duty pickup truck. I also handed him an ironclad employment contract. I hired him as the lifelong chief site inspector for all my future real estate investments, paying him an astronomical salary just to point at things and tell contractors they were doing it wrong. He didn't cry, but he couldn't look me in the eye as he shook my hand, his grip tight and lingering. My biological family is currently in absolute shambles. Gideon's law firm was raided by federal agents. He was disbarred and is currently awaiting trial for severe financial fraud. The bank foreclosed on their massive gated mansion. Blythe, having no actual skills and no father to fund her lifestyle, went bankrupt. The supreme irony is that she recently had to take a job at a commercial cleaning company just to pay rent for her tiny studio apartment. The girl who gifted me a toilet brush is now scrubbing floors for minimum wage. I realized I no longer needed an apology from Gideon or Rowena. I didn't need Blythe to admit she was cruel. Forgiving them or seeking closure from them would require me to value their opinions, and I had simply stopped valuing them. The $168 million did not make me a better person. It just gave me a megaphone loud enough to prove that their narrow, rigid definition of success was entirely wrong. People who dismiss you quickly usually understand you the least. They want to put you in a box because it makes them feel safe and superior. But when you refuse to fit into their mold, they will try to break you to make you fit. Do not let them. Build your own fortress, even if you have to build it out of the garbage they throw at you. I am letting them face the brutal consequences of their own hollow lives. But yesterday, something happened that made me pause. I received a handwritten letter in the mail from my mother, Rowena. It was stained with tears. She wrote that Gideon had suffered a severe heart attack from the stress of the trial and is currently in the hospital. Because their assets are frozen, they cannot afford the premium medical care he needs. She begged me, pleading as a mother, to send just $10,000 to cover his immediate hospital bills. With $168 million in the bank, $10,000 is literal pocket change to me. It is less than a rounding error. But I took the tear-stained letter, walked over to my home office, and fed it directly into the paper shredder. I did not send the money. I let them suffer. So I have to ask you guys. My mother is begging me to help save my father's life with a sum of money that means nothing to me. But I shredded the letter. Do you think I am being too cruel? Have I crossed the line into being just as toxic as they are, or did I do the right thing by letting them rot in the bed they made? Let me know down in the comments. I will be reading every single one. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you found this satisfying and want to hear more crazy family dramas, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing, but it means the world to us. I will see you in the next one.